Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, technical agronomist with Cooperative Farmers Elevator. On this week's Field Friday segment, thought we'd touch on some of the things we're really seeing here as these soybeans get close to maturity. We've got all kinds of things going on, probably a lot more than normal. So I wanted to touch on some of the things that you're starting to see out in these fields as they start to go and mature. As we talked last week, the stress that we had, it wasn't a friend of any of these plants. It's not going to help their grain fill be any more effective. The faster your grain fill goes, usually the lesser it is for your yields. I think we see that, how fast these things are turning and how early. A couple of things that I've been getting the most calls on in the last week or two, the soybean white mold, sclerotinia white mold that we oftentimes battle, especially in the manure fields, is really showing up again. And another thing that we see a lot that may look similar, but it isn't, the soybean gall midge larvae damage. I talked about that earlier in an episode earlier this summer, but I wanted to circle back. It's really gotten to be a bigger deal than we kind of had hoped it would, progression-wise. The last number of years, honestly, I wasn't so terrible worried about it being a major factor. First few rows along edges next to last year's soybean fields in corn where the flies emerge, go out and lay eggs. But it's gotten a lot further out into fields than we anticipated, and it's come really rapidly. If you haven't had soybean gall midge damage, I know the further east you go, the less it's infecting things. You're going to get it. Prior to this year, I wasn't worried about it. This year, I'm starting to be concerned, and it's spreading to the east from where we are. So it looks a lot like white mold, what we're used to seeing in the past, where beans just kind of die out in the field. Usually you see pockets. I've got a couple of aerial shots here that kind of show what you're looking at, and it looks similar. Bean plants just all of a sudden die. They're not all next to each other. They can be in patches. They can be spread along an area. The difference typically is the gall midge are worse on the edges. Basically, those flies emerge out of last year's beans, which is probably corn, move into the nearest soybean field acres and start laying eggs there. The closer to the edge, typically the worse they are, but they spread a lot further into fields. I think our populations have increased enough where it's not just a few, and they're causing problems along a lot of edges. I have seen them out 300-400 feet out in the field causing problems. I'm afraid the progression we're going on, they're going to be a bigger factor. White mold, on the other hand, looks similar. Plants are just dying, but they're in your more typical pockets we're used to. The lower bottoms, along edges, or not along edges like the gall midge, but they're in more pockets of bottom ground, areas of fields that typically get beans bigger and they tip over. If you've had white mold before, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're not sure, it's pretty easy to tell if it's white mold or not. You can go out into the fields. If that stem has some white mold on it, white mold growth probably somewhere between 6 and 12 inches off the soil surface, then you know you have white mold. If you can't find any white mold but the beans are dying like that, you probably are looking at soybean gall midge. I showed earlier this year you can crack those stems open, a lot of times find those orange larvae. That may not be the case anymore. I think they're probably done. They've probably gone into the soil to lay eggs for next year. So I don't think you're going to find them. You're just going to find the damage that shows up now. So just it is worth identifying what you have if you have areas of beans dying that you're not sure of, because there's different things we can do for the white mold potentially. The gall midge, there's still a lot of uncertainty as far as what we can even do with them yet. But if you think you've got white mold and you don't, you can spend a bunch of money and be shooting at the wrong target. So you'd probably want to make sure you identify it, especially if you're not familiar with what we're looking at. A couple other things that I'm getting calls and I'm seeing more brown stem rot this year. We're also seeing some sudden death syndrome here late. Even a little bit of Phytophthora killing beans. They all are doing different things. They're all killing these beans here at the end. There's a lot of stress on these plants trying to fill all the grain they created. So that's when they usually get the weakest and they start getting susceptible to some of these diseases. But I think if you're not sure what you're looking at, go out and look. There are some things we can do for, sudden death. There's some seed treatments, some varietal things. IDC, if we're looking at iron deficiency chlorosis, you maybe know where those pockets typically are. and brown stem rot. There's some variety things we can do there that'll be better than average if we need to. So a lot of things going on. It's good to identify and know what you're dealing with. So if there's something we can do about it, we can make a management decision for next year. So, but with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.